when we last met, we talked about lots of different biases, and we talked about confirmation bias. And I went to this conference, ISCO UK 2003, and it's about information discovery and data quality and data trust, right? And people were talking about pictures of food. People were talking about domain names. Guess what?
I guess that's something about making a choice, right? So is it about packaging versus the content?
Almost. They tried figuring out how do people figure out which source of information more credible. They were looking at the search results, right? So some snippets of pages on some controversial topics like is vegan diet healthy, right? And they were trying to figure out, and these random snippets, what would people choose, right? And guess what they found?
Tastes, I would say maybe in something, or what particular person does like or dislike or has prehistory with, right?
Yeah,
They can
almost
tend to
that.
choose more. But this is kind of similar to confirmation bias, but this is different. No?
Yeah, in fact, they haven't. In fact,
Tell
they
me more about
couldn't.
the abstract part, the outcomes.
So they were putting the page of search results in front of the users. They knew what these users thought beforehand. They knew what opinion the search snippets were sort of about, right? So one snippet said, yes, it's healthy, the vegan diet. No, it's not. Another one said, no, it's not healthy. And the view of credibility did not actually depend on whether the opinion of the article matched the opinion of the person.
So it's not the confirmation bias. So it's not about if it matches the previous belief, something else, right?
Well, that's right. So they weren't trying to find out if people pick the articles based on their previous belief. They were trying to figure out how do people decide on what's actually credible.
On the source.
That's right. And their previous opinion did not impact that at all.
Cool. That's pretty cool. So the question is, how do they choose the basis for decision making, even if this basis contradict the previous belief, but they consider it as authority, as credible one?
Yeah. So there were 10 or so different things that people actually used to make that judgment. So they looked for certain cues in these search snippets. So things like domain names or names of people of authority.
Just the URL,
Just the URL. That's right.
literally.
Yeah.
So the naming basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they would know that a certain piece would come from, say, one publication, say The Economist, versus another. In their example, it was German newspapers. But the idea is that there's this limited set of cues. People look at them and they make the judgment. They're making that judgment not really on the content of the actual snippet. Although the kind of language used impacts the credibility, but it's not the actual opinion of the piece. It's not whether it's matching or not.
Got it. This is very interesting, right? And so this is about wording. You mentioned it, domain names, wording inside the text, right? The language used, but you mentioned also the pictures, right? The images.
Right. So the images is a slightly different study, and they presented it in the same, in the same talk, but it's using exactly the same idea and just puts it into the domain of picking recipes, right? So how can people pick recipes from an online guide? turns out it's the same thing. They look for certain cues, whether it's the image, whether it's, a particular element of the recipe, particular ingredient that they know, and then they make judgment based on that.
Cool.
Fun fact, almost universally, people picked by default the unhealthiest recipe.
Well, what are the cues?
So what the researchers have done, they created a classifier to find out how likely the recipe will be selected based on attributes of the image. And there were 5 really basic attributes, things like, sharpness, brightness, colorfulness, contrast, entropy. So the sharper the image, the more colorful it is, the more likely the people, the more likely someone will choose the recipe.
This is so, I think this is even more kind of harmful. I would say thermonuclear compared to confirmation bias, because confirmation bias, we can notice that we are having it at the level of analyzing our thoughts and noticing the errors, right, in our thinking. But here is another thing. This is an emotional response to the image, to the particular wording, to the language used, to basically the packaging of the content of the information.